Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Carlo Ancelotti changed up his El Clasico tactics, and Real Madrid walked away with a 4-0 win at the home of their biggest rivals. But what exactly were Real Madrid's tactics, and what went wrong with Xavi's own tactics? Let's take a look. And we'll actually start with Barcelona on the ball, as they were quite interesting, and Madrid's attacking transition was prominent. On the goal kick, Koundé and Alonso would drop either side of Ter Stegen, with Busquets and Roberto forming a double pivot, whilst Kessie tended to push up higher on the right-hand side, although Lewandowski could also drop into this position. Real Madrid in these scenarios would be pressing high, and that was primarily through Benzema being ready to press Alonso, and Vinicius coming from out to in, ready to press Koundé. This was backed up by Valverde, as well as Modric looking to pick up the double pivot, and Rodrigo on the right hand side would look to cover Balde. So because of Vinicius's positioning, and Balde being covered by Rodrigo, Barcelona tended to start through the right hand side whenever possible, and with Rafinha pushing all the way up, Camavinga would occupy this halfway position, where he could both press Araujo if needed, or drop deeper onto Camavinga. And if Barcelona did play out to Araujo, Real Madrid would temporarily shift to a back three to try and maintain some defensive solidity. But Barcelona were extremely interesting in open play, and their biggest attacking threat was the switch of play. One aspect which has given Real Madrid problems in Clásicos this season is the positioning of Xavi, who tends to come in narrow, allowing Barcelona to switch to a box and have the 4 versus 3 against the Real Madrid midfield, which is something that they once again implemented today, with Balde being given the responsibility to push high up on the left-hand side whenever possible, whilst the rest of the backline would shift to somewhat of a back 3. So where before, when Barcelona were attacking with a midfield 3, Real could be man-to-man, but now that was no longer possible if they maintained their default shape like so. So Rodrigo played a vital role, as in the defensive phase he wouldn't always stick out wide, and instead was tasked with coming in quite narrow so that Real Madrid could shift to a box of their own to counter Barcelona's. And Rodrigo would have the role of both covering one of the pivots as well as looking to press the centre-back when it was possible. This made it harder for Barcelona to play through the centre like they usually do, and gave them slightly less control. And it would mean that Barcelona would be filtered out to the flanks. But Barcelona quickly adapted and looked to overload the left-hand side, and often, due to Rodrigo having been pressing from out to in, whilst looking to cover the pivot as well, Balde would be difficult to access at times, so if Rodrigo was drawn to the centre-back and his cover shadow made it impossible to immediately access the pivot, we saw Roberto occupy this left-back position, with Balde still pushing high up. This would then allow the Barcelona midfield to come across, and all of a sudden they had an overload down that left-hand side. And we could also see Xavi move deeper to make it difficult for Valverde, for example, to commit to that press to Roberto. This naturally would mean that Real Madrid's midfield would have to come across to try and prevent this overload somewhat. And Camavinga tended to stay in a more tucked-in position in the defensive phase, whilst Rafinha tended to stay high on the right-hand side, with Araujo maintaining a more defensive position. And Vinicius was less likely to look to track all the way back onto Rafinha, instead occupying a position like this. So as much as possible, Barcelona would look to initiate the switch to Rafinha, and here we see that individual battles are a big part of football, as Camavinga would come across. And in this match, he dealt with the threat of Rafinha excellently, for the most part, preventing him getting into extremely dangerous positions. So here we see that Barcelona box, and Xavi has rotated with Lewandowski, but the principles are the same. And we also see the role of Rodrigo, having come from out to in, to pick up one of the pivots. Rodrigo is now drawn towards the centre-back, which opens up that gap for Roberto to drop into. Running on the same play, we can see that Camavinga is tucked in, due to Kessie making this underlapping run, which he often did make to support Rafinha. So, the switch to Rafinha is on, which leads to a 1v1. Barcelona could look to instill a similar strategy down the right hand side, especially if Vinicius had been pressing more central alongside Benzema, as that would allow Araujo to receive the first pass, and this would now allow them to begin the overload on the right hand side instead. And Lewandowski would usually drop into the half space, and the rest of the midfield would subsequently support, forcing Real's own across. And once again, Rodrigo often found himself tucking in to pick up an extra man, hoping to prevent that overload. This would then be backed up by Gavi, who would not just move into the half space, but at times all the way across the pitch, or even into deeper zones, and Carvajal's main priority was picking up Gavi rather than Balde. So, time and again would see Balde making the run down the outside and receiving the switch, which led to several dangerous attacking positions. Here we see one such scenario as Araujo is on the ball, with Vinicius having been more central on the attack. So now Real Madrid's midfield trio is dragged across, as well as Rodrigo, who is looking to come in central as always. Gavi, coming in super central, occupies Carvajal, opening up the big switch for Balde. He then combines with Gavi, leading to a dangerous scenario for Rafinha. So this scenario with Balde having the space was the risk that Real Madrid decided they were willing to take. And this was even riskier when the overload had started on the right hand side, as rather than having that more structured back three that looked like this with Alonso covering, if the overload had been on the right hand side, there was much more space there, and time and again we saw that with Balde high, Real Madrid identified the opportunity to look to hit Barcelona in the transition through the likes of Rodrigo and Benzema, and this actually led to the first and the fourth goal directly. And this first goal is the best example of everything we've spoken about, as Carvajal is narrow on Gavi, Lewandowski had dropped off to the right hand side to begin the overload. Rodrigo is defending narrow, which means that the ball to Balde out at left back is eventually on. He finds Balde, and his cross leads to an extremely dangerous shot from Lewandowski that could have gone in. But now on the transition, Rodrigo from this higher central position can take advantage of Balde, who is now hopelessly out of position. Barca had the back three, but Alonso committed himself here, meaning that now Benzema attacks the space vacated by Balde. So Vinicius can find Benzema, receive the cutback and have the shot, eventually leading to the follow-up goal. But make no mistake, this wasn't just about sitting back and countering for Ancelotti. In possession, he also changed up tactics for Real Madrid. The roles of Camavinga and Rodrigo in these possession phases were vital, as where usually this season in El Clasico, Real Madrid had been overwhelmed through the centre, today was different. In deeper play, we often saw Real Madrid use something like a 2-1, with Modric being higher than Valverde and Kroos for the most part. And where initially it looked like Barcelona could go man-to-man, Kroos would often drop deeper into the backline, either off to the left-hand side or more centrally between the centre-backs. And this could potentially draw a Barcelona midfielder higher up the pitch. And here we see the contrast between how Real Madrid used their men in possession and Barcelona. Barcelona were defensive with their right back and offensive with their left back. But Real Madrid gave both of their fullbacks an important role in possession. Especially when Kroos was able to get on the ball having drawn a midfielder, Camavinga would often take the opportunity to immediately invert so that he could receive the line-breaking pass from Kroos, and now they were facing the Barcelona defense, then allowing them to progress up the pitch. And this was helped by Vinicius providing the width for Real Madrid down the left. Here we see Kroos has dropped deep, and this draws Kessié. A large gap has been left in the midfield region, which Camavinga identifies and looks to invert into. So now, Kessié was drawn to Kroos, so Camavinga has acres to receive in, and could have potentially driven up the pitch. And it wasn't just about the left back looking to cause the overloads. Carvajal was tasked with providing all the width on the right hand side, and Rodrigo rarely stuck outside as a regular winger. And instead, he often lined up alongside Modric so that they effectively had dual 10s in the midfield, so that even if it wasn't Kessié on Kroos, and for example Rafinha had moved on to him, they still had a 4 versus 3 in the midfield. And these principles of looking to cause a midfield overload continued high up the pitch, except now it was even more pronounced. Where Barcelona had built up with a back three, with Araujo being a defensive inverted fullback, Camavinga was not that, and instead he could push up alongside Kroos and Valverde so that now they effectively had a 5 versus 3 in this midfield region. And what this meant, with Vinicius and Carvajal providing all the width, if Barcelona tried to stick to 3 midfielders to compact the space, Real Madrid could use combination to get into dangerous zones. But if they look to get their fullbacks to tuck in to help reduce the threat of the men in the half spaces, now the dangerous wide man, particularly in Vinicius, could potentially have these 1v1 situations. So here we see Camavinga, Kroos and Valverde deeper, allowing Rodrigo and Modric to have more attacking influence through the centre. So Barcelona built with a 3-2 with Araujo deep, whereas Real Madrid went with a back 2 and a midfield 3 instead. And down the left there was a little bit more variability, as at times we saw Vinicius coming in central to combine with the likes of Rodrigo, Modric and Benzema, and in those cases Camavinga could then operate as a more traditional left back, so they had many options. Los Blancos may have been under the cosh early on, but in the end it was a deserved win, with Ancelotti giving every player a vital role in possession being crucial to the win. If Barcelona made their early dominance count, this could have been a different story, but they showed a lack of creativity, a problem which has come up time and again once they went behind. For the manager tactical scores, Ancelotti earns an 8, with his gambles and decisions paying dividends, while Xavi earns a 4, as once again his side showed that they at times struggled to create.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.